The only sound in the intensive care unit was the mechanical hiss of the ventilator and the steady, rhythmic beep of the heart monitor. Beep, beep, beep. It was the sound of my husband, Ryan, fighting to stay alive. I sat in the plastic chair, holding his hand, his skin feverish and limp against mine. But the woman standing over me wasn't holding his hand. She wasn't praying. She wasn't even crying. My mother-in-law, Brenda, was tapping her foot. She stared at the tube snaking down her only son's throat, then checked her watch with an annoyed sigh. She leaned down, her voice cutting through the sterile silence, and asked the only question that mattered to her. She said, "Emily, he handles the transfers on the 15th. Do you know his banking PIN? I have bills to pay." I stared at her, and something inside me snapped. Before I tell you exactly what I did next, drop a comment and let me know where you are listening from right now. I would love to see who is part of our community today. Panic is a wasted emotion in a crisis. I didn't scream. I didn't slap her. In that moment, looking at Brenda's impatient face, while Ryan lay there with machines breathing for him, the grief evaporated. It was replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. It felt like the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. I realized then that she was not a mother worrying about her dying child. She was a creditor worrying about a missed payment, and I was just the obstacle standing between her and the cash register. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. Brenda's eyes lit up, greedy and expectant. She probably thought I was looking for the code she had demanded. The screen unlocked with a swipe. My fingers did not tremble. They were steady. Opening the banking app, the balance stared back at me. It was the money Ryan had worked 70-hour weeks to accumulate. It was the down payment for a house we never bought because Brenda always had an emergency. It was the price of his exhaustion. I tapped the transfer button. Canceling the scheduled payment would have been a temporary fix. Instead, I initiated a full transfer. I moved everything. Every single cent from our joint checking account went into a secure, high-yield savings account I had opened years ago, one she did not know existed. I watched the little spinning wheel on the screen. It spun for 3 seconds. 3 seconds to undo 10 years of financial bleeding. Then, a green checkmark appeared. Transfer complete. Balance, 0. Brenda leaned closer, her floral perfume cloying and thick in the small, sterile room. She tapped her manicured fingernails on the metal bed rail, right next to Ryan's limp hand. She said, "Well, do you have it or not? I need to go to the bank before it closes." I locked my phone and slid it back into my pocket. Her strategy was transparent. She wanted a fight. She wanted me to cry, to beg, to explain myself so she could twist my words and play the victim. Narcissists feed on emotion, and I decided right then to starve her. It is a technique called the gray rock method. You become as uninteresting and unresponsive as a rock. You offer no fuel. I looked her dead in the eye. My face remained a blank slate. I kept my voice flat, devoid of any energy she could feed on. I said, "I do not know it. You will have to wait until he wakes up." Her jaw dropped. The mask of the concerned mother slipped entirely, revealing the ugly entitlement underneath. She hissed, "Excuse me? You are his wife. How do you not know his passwords? That is ridiculous." Rolling my shoulders back, I felt a strange new power in the silence. I said, "We keep our finances separate. There is nothing I can do." She scoffed, a loud, sharp sound that echoed off the tile walls. She looked at Ryan, her unconscious son, and shook her head like he was a broken appliance that had inconvenienced her afternoon. She said, "Useless. Both of you. I do not know why he married someone so incompetent." She grabbed her designer purse, paid for by us, and stormed out of the room. The door clicked shut, and the silence returned. My heart was not racing. I did not feel guilty. For the first time in 10 years, I had not scrambled to fix her problems. I looked at the notification on my phone. The money was gone. Safe. It was not just a banking transaction. It was the first shot in a war she did not even know had started. I realized then that my compassion had been a luxury she had overdrafted for years. And now? The account was closed. I pulled the plastic chair closer to the bed, the metal legs scraping against the linoleum floor. The sound was harsh, but it was the only thing that felt real. I looked at Ryan's face. It was bruised, swollen, and hidden behind a plastic mask that was forcing oxygen into his lungs. I picked up his hand again. It was rough, calloused from work. These were the hands of a man who built systems, who solved complex problems for a living, yet he could not solve the problem of his own mother. Opening the banking app again, I scrolled back through the history. It read like a crime scene report. On the 15th of last month, a transfer of $3,600. On the 15th of the month before that, $3,600. And the month before that, it went back for years. That money was not for rent. It was not for food. It was for Brenda's image. It paid for the lease on a luxury car she drove to church to brag about her success. It paid for inventory for her multi-level marketing schemes that always failed, leaving her garage full of unsold vitamins and leggings while our savings account stayed empty. I used to be angry at Ryan. I used to fight with him in whispered arguments in our kitchen, asking him why we were paying her mortgage while we were still renting a 2-bedroom apartment. He would just rub his temples, looking so small, and say, "She is all alone, Emily. She sacrificed everything for me. It is my duty." But sitting there, looking at the stitches across his forehead, I realized it was not duty. It was a conditioning program. Therapists call it FOG, fear, obligation, and guilt. Brenda had installed those buttons in him when he was a child so she could press them whenever she needed cash in his adulthood. She did not raise a son. She raised a retirement plan. She raised a safety net for her own reckless choices. The police report said there were no skid marks at the scene of the accident. Ryan had not tried to brake. He had simply fallen asleep at the wheel. He had drifted across the center line and hit a guardrail at 60 miles per hour. And why was he driving home at 3 in the morning? Because he had picked up an extra consulting gig. A gig he took because Brenda had called him crying about a maxed-out credit card and a threat of a lawsuit. She did not just crash his car. She crashed him. She had pushed him to the edge of his physical limits to fund a lifestyle she did not earn. I looked at the bruises on his arms, the tubes, the monitors. This was the receipt for her lifestyle. She had overdrafted his energy, his health, and almost his life. The anger that had started as a cold spark in my chest began to burn hotter. It was not the chaotic, screaming anger of a wife who feels neglected. It was the righteous, calculating anger of a witness who has seen enough evidence to return a verdict. I looked at the cracked screen of his phone sitting on the bedside table. It lit up with another notification. A text from Brenda. It did not ask if he was awake. It did not ask if the surgery went well. It said, "Let me know when the transfer goes through. I need to go shopping." I reached over and turned his phone face down. That was the moment the guilt vanished completely. I wasn't protecting a husband from his mother anymore. I was protecting a victim from his abuser. And I knew that when he woke up, if he woke up, I would have to show him the truth. I would have to show him that the woman who gave him life was the one trying to drain it out of him. 3 days passed. 72 hours of the same sterile air, the same rhythmic beeping, and the same terrifying stillness from the man in the bed. Ryan was stable, the doctor said, but he hadn't woken up. His brain was resting, trying to repair the damage caused by the crash. But while he rested, the war outside the hospital room was just getting started. Brenda never came back, not once. She didn't call the nurse's station to check his vitals. She didn't send flowers, but she made sure her presence was felt. My phone became an instrument of torture. It sat on the metal bedside table, vibrating constantly. Buzz, buzz, buzz. It sounded like an angry hornet trapped in a jar, drilling into my skull. It started with texts. At first, they were demanding, "I know you moved the money. Put it back." Then, they became accusatory. "You are stealing from a pensioner. That is a crime." When I didn't reply, sticking to my strategy of silence, she escalated. She started leaving voicemails. I listened to one, just to archive the evidence. Her voice wasn't sad, it was venomous. she screamed. "You think you can cut me off? I am his mother. I have rights. That money is for my care. He promised it to me." By the second day, the siege moved beyond my personal phone. I opened my work email on my laptop, trying to distract myself with a few spreadsheets, and there it was. An email from Brenda, CCing the general info address for my company. The subject line read, "Urgent. Employee misconduct." She was trying to humiliate me professionally. She was trying to get me fired so I would be too broken to fight her. My hands shook as I deleted it, blocking her address. This wasn't just a family dispute anymore. It was harassment. But the breaking point came on the morning of the third day. The vibration on the metal table was so persistent, it actually woke me from a nap. I picked up the phone. It was a picture message. It was a screenshot of a legal website, highlighting a statute about filial responsibility laws and mandatory elder support. Below the image, she had typed a message that made my blood run cold. "If the transfer isn't in my account by noon, I am coming down there with my lawyer. Since he is incapacitated and you are clearly stealing his assets, I will petition the court for emergency power of attorney. I will take control of his finances and his medical decisions. I will make sure you aren't even allowed in the room." I stared at the screen, my breath catching in my throat. Power of attorney. She wanted control over his medical care. This was the woman who had driven him to exhaustion, the woman who cared more about her credit card bill than his life support. If she got control, she wouldn't make decisions to help him recover. She would make decisions that were cheapest for her. She would pull the plug if it meant getting access to his life insurance faster. The threat hit me physically, my stomach twisted. The passive defense, the silence, the gray rock method, it wasn't enough anymore. You can't ignore a predator who is trying to break down your front door. I looked at Ryan, helpless and silent. If I didn't act, if I didn't stop her permanently, she wasn't just going to take his money. She was going to take his life. I looked at the clock. It was 10 a.m. I had 2 hours before her deadline. I wiped the sleep from my eyes. The exhaustion vanished, replaced by a surge of adrenaline. I didn't need to hide anymore. I needed a weapon. Leaving the hospital felt like breaking a seal. The drive to the apartment was a blur of white-knuckled grip on the steering wheel. Inside, the silence was heavy. The apartment felt like a tomb, smelling like the coffee Ryan had brewed the morning of the accident, stale and forgotten. I went straight to Ryan's home office. Tearing through the filing cabinets, I hunted for our marriage certificate and his tax returns. A stack of manila folders came out, and a heavy red envelope slid out from between them. It wasn't a tax document. It was a letter from a major insurance provider. I frowned. We had life insurance through my work, but I didn't recognize this logo. Opening it, the words premium notice and past due jumped out, but then I looked at the policy details, and the breath left my lungs. The policy owner was Brenda. The insured life was Ryan. I sat down on the floor, surrounded by paper. The coverage amount was $500,000. The policy had been taken out 10 years ago, right around the time she started demanding the allowance. She wasn't just taking his money to live. She was using his money to bet against him. She was paying premiums on a policy that only paid out if he died. Suddenly, the pressure she put on him, the guilt trips, the late-night demands, the refusal to let him rest, it all looked different. It wasn't just neediness. It was an investment strategy. She was pushing him toward an early grave, and she had the paperwork to cash in on it. I grabbed the folder and drove back to the hospital. I didn't speed. I drove with the terrifying calm of a soldier carrying a loaded weapon. When I walked into the room, the air had changed. The rhythmic whoosh of the ventilator was gone, replaced by the soft hiss of an oxygen mask. Ryan's eyes were open. He looked terrible, pale, bruised, and confused. He blinked at me, his eyes trying to focus. He tried to speak, but his voice was a rasp, dry as sandpaper. He whispered one word, "Mom?" It broke my heart. Even after everything, his first instinct was to look for her. I walked over and took his hand. I didn't smooth his hair. I didn't offer empty platitudes. I couldn't protect him from the truth anymore. I had to perform surgery on his soul, and I had to do it without anesthesia. I said, "She is not here, Ryan. She hasn't been here." He looked confused. I pulled out my phone. I saw the pain in his eyes, but I pressed play on the voicemail she had left that morning. Brenda's voice filled the room, shrill and entitled. "If the transfer isn't in my account by noon, I am coming down there with my lawyer, since he is incapacitated." Emergency power of attorney. Ryan closed his eyes. Tears leaked out from the corners, tracking through the dust on his cheeks. He listened to his mother threaten to sue his wife while he lay in a hospital bed. He listened to her talk about him like he was an asset to be seized, not a son to be saved. When the message ended, the silence was heavy. I placed the insurance letter on his chest. I explained what it was. I told him, "She has a policy on you, Ryan. She's waiting for a payout." He stared at the ceiling for a long time. The machine beeped steady, but his heart rate climbed. When he finally looked at me, the confusion was gone. The soft, dutiful look I had seen for 10 years was gone. In its place was a deep, hollow grief that was slowly hardening into resolve. He pulled the oxygen mask down an inch. His voice was weak, but the words were clear. He said, "Do what you have to do." I nodded. I told him my plan. It was a trap, a Trojan horse. We were going to give her exactly what she wanted, the news of his death, and record her reaction. It was the only way to get the evidence we needed to get a restraining order and invalidate her claims. He didn't hesitate. He looked at the phone, then at me. I placed the phone on the metal tray table, right next to Ryan's head. I hit the speaker button and then the record icon on my second device. My hands were steady, but my heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Ryan lay perfectly still, staring at the ceiling, his eyes wide and wet. This was it. The test. I dialed Brenda's number. It rang once, twice. She answered on the third ring. Her tone wasn't worried, it was annoyed. She snapped, "It is 12:15. You are late. Did you make the transfer, or do I need to call my lawyer?" I took a breath, channeling every ounce of grief I could summon. I made my voice tremble. I let it crack. I said, "Brenda, it's Ryan." There was a pause. For a split second, I hoped, a tiny, foolish part of me hoped she would gasp. I hoped she would scream, "Is he okay?" I hoped she would prove us wrong, but she didn't. Her voice stayed flat. She asked, "What about him?" I squeezed my eyes shut. I said, "There were complications. His heart. It just stopped. The doctors tried, but he's gone, Brenda. He passed away 10 minutes ago." The silence that followed stretched for 5 seconds. In the hospital room, the only sound was the real, steady beep of Ryan's heart monitor. Beep, 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 proving he was alive. We both held our breath, waiting for the wail of a grieving mother. Instead, we heard a long, heavy exhale. It wasn't a sob. It was a sigh of relief. Then, Brenda spoke. Her voice was disturbingly calm, almost businesslike. She said, "Finally." I told him he was working too hard. I knew he wouldn't last. Ryan flinched. His entire body jerked on the bed as if he'd been slapped. She didn't stop. She didn't ask about the funeral. She didn't ask to see him. She pivoted instantly to the math. She said, "Listen, Emily, since you are the widow, I am going to need you to sign some papers immediately. I have a policy on him. A big one, 500,000. I have been paying the premiums with his allowance for 10 years. It is my money. I need you to sign off so I can get the payout quickly." I stared at the phone in horror. She wasn't just gambling the money away on MLMs or clothes. She was investing it. She had been betting on her own son's death for a decade. Every time she demanded cash, she was funding the jackpot she would collect when he finally collapsed under the pressure she created. Ryan turned his head toward the phone. His face was pale, drained of blood, but his eyes were burning with a terrifying intensity. He was listening to his own mother calculate the profit margin of his death. Brenda continued, oblivious. "Don't play dumb with me. I need the death certificate. I will come over to your apartment. Not the hospital. I hate hospitals. Bring the paperwork to the house. Tonight." I looked at Ryan. He gave a microscopic nod. The tears were gone. The sadness was gone. I spoke into the phone, my voice losing its tremble, turning ice cold. I said, "Okay, Brenda, come to the apartment tonight. I'll have the paperwork ready." She didn't even say goodbye. She just said, "Good." The click of the disconnected line echoed in the room. I stopped the recording. I looked at my husband. He wasn't the man who had crashed the car 3 days ago. That man, the dutiful son, the guilt-ridden provider, had died the moment she sighed. The man looking back at me now was a stranger. He was harder. He was broken in a way that couldn't be fixed, only rebuilt. He whispered, "She bet against me." I nodded, squeezing his hand. I said, "Yeah," and she just lost everything. 2 days later, the knock came at the door. It was 8 p.m. sharp. Brenda was nothing if not punctual when money was involved. I sat on the couch in our living room. The lights dimmed low. The apartment was quiet, but it was a loaded silence, heavy with anticipation. I opened the door. Brenda stood there wearing a black dress and a veil. It was a perfect costume for the grieving mother, designed to garner sympathy from the neighbors she had passed in the hallway. But the moment she stepped inside and I closed the door, the act dropped. She pushed the veil back, her eyes bright and eager. She didn't hug me. She didn't look for urns or photos. She looked at my hands. She said, "Where is it?" I parked down the block so I wouldn't get stopped by people offering condolences. It is such a waste of time. "Do you have the death certificate? I need to get the claim in the mail by tomorrow morning to get the check next week." I stared at her. The callousness was breathtaking. She was treating her son's death like a trip to the DMV. I walked over to the coffee table and picked up a thick manila folder. I said, "I have the paperwork right here, Brenda. Everything you need to settle the account." She snatched it from my hand, her fingers trembling with greed. She ripped it open, already muttering about interest rates and debts she could finally clear. But then she stopped. She pulled out the top document. It wasn't a death certificate. It was a transcript of the call we had recorded 2 days ago. Beneath that was a legal draft for a permanent restraining order. Her brow furrowed. She looked up at me. Confusion warring with anger. She snapped, "What is this? This isn't the certificate. What game are you playing?" I didn't answer. I just looked toward the hallway. The sound of a squeaking wheel cut through the room. Brenda froze. She turned her head slowly, her eyes widening. From the shadows of the hallway, Ryan rolled out in his wheelchair. He was pale. He was thin. He was still wearing his hospital wristband, but he was sitting upright, and his eyes were locked on his mother. Brenda screamed. She actually took a step back, dropping the folder. The papers scattered across the floor like confetti. She gasped, "Ryan? You're alive?" She didn't sound happy. She sounded terrified. She sounded like someone who had just seen a ghost, or worse, a lawsuit. Ryan didn't smile. He didn't cry. He looked at her with the cold detachment of a judge looking at a convict. He said, "Disappointed?" "Mom?" she stammered, trying to reassemble her mask. She took a step toward him, reaching out her hands. She wailed, "Oh, thank God! It was a mistake! Emily told me you were dead! I was so heartbroken." Ryan raised a hand, stopping her in her tracks. He didn't yell. He didn't let his voice rise. He spoke with a quiet, lethal calm. He said, "Stop acting. I heard the call. Mom, I heard you sigh with relief. I heard you ask for the payout before my body was even cold." Brenda froze, her hands hovering in the air. Her face went pale as the realization hit her. It was a trap, Ryan continued, his voice trembling slightly, not from sadness, but from rage. He said, "You have a $500,000 bet on my head. You didn't want a son. You wanted a payout. You drove me into that guardrail, and you were disappointed I survived the crash." Brenda tried to pivot to anger. She hissed, "How dare you? After everything I sacrificed for you?" Ryan pointed to the door. The gesture was absolute. He said, "Get out. The allowance is gone. The insurance policy is void. And if you ever try to contact us again, Emily sends the recording of that call to the police and the insurance fraud division. You are not my mother anymore. You are just a bad investment," I finally wrote off. She looked at him, then at me. She saw no mercy in our eyes. She saw the end of her free ride. She didn't apologize. She didn't beg. She grabbed her purse, stepped over the scattered papers, and fled out the door. When the latch clicked shut, Ryan let out a long breath and slumped back in his chair. It was over. The ghost had haunted the house, and the monster had fled. It has been 6 months since the night Brenda ran out of our apartment, leaving her scattered schemes on the floor. 6 months of silence. We moved 3 weeks after the confrontation. We bought a small place with a big porch, the kind of house we could never afford when we were paying a $3,600 monthly tax to his mother. Now, the mortgage is ours. The equity is ours. Ryan is doing better. It wasn't an overnight fix. You don't undo 30 years of psychological conditioning in a week. He goes to therapy every Tuesday to untangle the wires she crossed in his head. He is learning that his worth isn't measured by how much he provides for others. He is learning that love shouldn't feel like a debt collection call. As for Brenda, justice found her, but not through us. After she left, she tried to smear us on social media, claiming we had abandoned her in her old age. We simply released a 30-second clip of the recording, the part where she sighed in relief at the news of her son's death. The internet did the rest. She was shamed out of her church group. Last we heard, the insurance company launched a formal fraud investigation into her other policies. She is too busy fighting to stay out of jail to bother us anymore. But the best part isn't the justice. It is the quiet. I am sitting on the back porch right now, watching Ryan paint the railing. His phone is sitting on the table next to my coffee cup. For 10 years, that phone was a bomb that could go off at any moment. It was a source of panic, demands, and guilt. Now, it is just a phone. It sits there, silent. No vibrations, no angry texts, no missed calls. Ryan walks over, wiping paint from his hands. He picks up the device, scrolling through his contacts one last time. He finds the entry labeled Mom. He doesn't hesitate. He doesn't flinch. He presses block, then delete. He puts the phone down and smiles at me, a real smile, one that reaches his eyes. He says, "It is finally quiet, isn't it?" I nod, taking a sip of my coffee. I say, "Yes, it is. We learned the hard way that blood doesn't make you family. Love, respect, and safety make you family. And sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to cut the anchor that is drowning you. If you have ever had to make the hard choice to cut off a toxic family member to save your own peace, I want to hear your story. Tell me in the comments below. At what point did you finally say, enough? Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of justice and resilience. Thanks for watching.